So the update dropped, and Steel Fortress still sucks. Easily the worst content in the game. It's poorly designed, and it seems like they tried to make some changes to make it a little bit better, but I think overall they've made it worse because they've made the RNG on it frustrating in a different way. So for those of you guys who don't know about it, let's go over the dungeon and how it works first, and then we can talk about what they changed. So Steel Fortress, the Ancient Tormentor. So Steel Fist attacks all enemies, decreases their attack speed for 2 turns. This is the AoE attack. Thunderblow attacks the enemy target 3 times to decrease attack bar by 30% and stuns the enemy if the enemy's attack bar drops to 0 for 2 turns. So 2 turn stun still exists in this situation. What they changed was the Thunderbolt passive. So Thunderbolt passive is now whenever the enemy's 5th turn ends, drops a Thunderbolt on a random enemy to stun the enemy with a 25% chance for 1 turn. Attacks up to 4 times in proportion to the boss's attack power, and the attack won't land as a glancing hit. Now, before they changed it, the way it used to work is it was 25% chance per beneficial effect. So if it had the 2 buffs, the defense and the shield, then it was 50% chance. If it had that plus the attack buff and the crit buff, it was 100% chance, right? This mechanic doesn't glance. It can't be countered by glancing debuff. It can't be countered by Molly, any situation like that. So Thunderbolt passive is one of the issues I have with the dungeon. Another one of the issues, I think that Steel Will is a passive. Had a good idea. There was a cool idea when they said additionally the damage received from the enemy is decreased by 20% per beneficial effect. But I think that they made it too strong in the sense that without buff block, this dungeon is actually impossible. You can beat it with dots, you can beat it with ignore buff mechanics, but they're unreliable and it takes quite long in most cases. Or you need extremely niche units. For example, the people who are using the double Asema comps, that's obviously completely unobtainable for most players. And then the other issue I have, the last thing, is acceleration drive. So the right tower increases the boss's attack bar by 20% and then additionally increases the attack bar by 20% per beneficial effect granted on the boss. So you can get up to an immediate turn, you get 100% attack bar from that. So the things that are frustrating with the boss. Okay, so the first one is obviously the lightning mechanic is terrible. It's really, really RNG before, and it's really, really RNG after. The left tower mechanic's not so bad. The defense break is okay. The right tower is frustrating because of the amount of attack bar gain that's given, but it's somewhat manageable. So the issues I had with the old boss were that because it was 25% chance per buff, if you missed your buff block, you were screwed. You either had to have immunity to deal with it, or you had to make sure the boss had no buffs. Now, this was manageable for different teams. A lot of us ran things like Gina Pang. Some of us ran things like double buff blocker with a Lauren to make sure the boss never moved. And it was great because once you took the buffs off the boss, you could never be stunned. So you were in an okay position if you ran double will or triple will on your team. Obviously, double will, triple will is not obtainable for everyone and it's difficult. But for those of us who are trying to consistently speedrun the dungeon, if we ran the double will, triple will teams, we could bash our head against the mechanics of the dungeon and get through it. We could get those 55-second, 1 minute success, like with 1 minute times with like 99% success rate, right? It was tough, but it was doable. The problem with that was that if you missed too many times due to the innate 15% resistance, the 2-turn stun from the lightning bolt made it impossible to come back, right? It was such a strong snowball mechanic that once you got 2-turn stunned, because you can't proc out of 2-turn stun, it was just over completely, right? It was basically getting like Gani Hathord in PvE content, and that's why we hated it so much. So the overarching issues with the dungeon are that 1, it relies on a rare debuff, block beneficial effect. 2, there's only 1 unit out there that has a consistent perfect AI, which is Gina, because she will always save her skill for when the boss has a buff, so she'll buff strip with it. And then the issue with her is that, first of all, she can't be awakened, and second of all, she doesn't really output a lot, besides like she has that plus the skill 1 dots, and it's also only a 1-turn buff block. The 15% resistant forces this perfect AI unit to be really, really frustrating to use, because even though she's the one that always uses it, sometimes she just gets resisted even if you're maximum accuracy for the content. The more reliable units, people are always like, oh, just use Zinc, just use Eirgar, whatever. The problem with that, Zinc being the highest, I believe it's a 92 or 93% chance if you're max accuracy due to having multiple hits on the debuff applying effect. Even he doesn't work super well because 1, he can get 15% resisted on each hit, and 2, their AI is terrible. We've seen tons of runs where Eirgar uses skill 1 4 times in a row, or Zinc uses skill 1 4 times in a row, and it's just unreliable and it's frustrating, right? this dungeon doesn't allow you to be super creative to try to make speed teams. Obviously, we have speed team metas like double dogs with the double Rauks, and in the past it was twins or using, Julie because the conditional AI. But I'm so frustrated that Steel Fortress is just so ridiculously punishing if you miss this extremely rare debuff. So we can go over it now, but what they changed in the content, they changed a couple things, which I don't honestly think are that much better, but I'd like to see what you think. You can let me know in the comments below if you think it's a good change overall. All right, let's get to it right here. Okay, so they changed the Thunderbolt passive. So Thunderbolt passive, instead of being 25% chance to stun per buff and having 2-turn stun, now it's 1-turn stun, so it's manageable. However, it is always a 25% chance, which means that there's always a chance you get RNG stunned, which means even if you run double, triple will like I do, you might still lose because random stuns exist, right? So my team no longer works. My 55 to 1 minute team, that was about 98, 99%, no longer works because the 25% chance to stun, I usually kill in the 5th rotation. Now, if I get stunned too many times on the 3rd or 4th rotation, I just don't output enough damage and we die. So that's super frustrating, but I'll adjust my team accordingly. And another thing that they adjusted is they did a monster skill balancing. So with the monster skill balancing, they took the Vampire Lord Dark Eirgar and gave him an extra turn after his skill 3. With the Kung Fu Girls, they gave Ling Ling and Fei block beneficial effect on their skill 2. So their skill 2 is a multi-hit single buff strip that also applies a 1-turn beneficial block. And then Ling Ling on her skill 3 got an effect modification. So her skill 3 used to strip all buffs, and now it blocks beneficial effects and decreases attack speed for 2 turns. The Lizardman also got changed. So the Fire Lizardman, which I believe his name is Igmanodon. Both of these units are defense scaling, let me start with. But the Fire one, so that's its passive used to be reduces the chance of getting a critical hit by 50% and also decreases the speed of the attacker. They changed the decrease the speed of the attacker to a block beneficial effect for 1 turn with a 100% chance. Now, theoretically, that sounds amazing, but I'll go over why it's not actually that good in a moment. And then their skill 2 is Destructive Blow. So before, their skill 2 has an increased crit rate by 30%, and they removed that and changed it to a block beneficial effect for 2 turns with a 75% chance that cannot be upgraded or changed with skill ups. So these sound great in theory. I have a 6-star Gleanodon. I can show you some footage in a minute of him in the dungeon. But the problem is with team-up teams, so like Rauks and Crows, he only hits with skill 1, and then if you build him to use skill 2, he still struggles with AI like everyone else does, right? With Igmanodon, same thing for his skill 2, and then the passive issue is that, first of all, it doesn't help you at all for any sort of speed run or any fast style of run, and the second issue is that because he's fire, he only gets targeted sometimes. The boss has 2 attacks, one where it's single target and one where it's AoE. If it AoEs, yes, you can apply it, but it can still get 15% resisted. And if he single targets, he's most likely never going to hit your Igmanodon, which is an issue. I have 2 Feis, so I built both my Feis to try this out earlier. I'll show some content, some videos of that as well. Both my Feis are bad because the chance to go from skill 1 into skill 2 is only 30% chance. And even with double Rauk, double Fei, or even double Rauk, Crow, and Fei, it's still not consistent enough. It's just really, really, really inconsistent in how often she does the skill 1 into skill 2. So that's kind of frustrating. And then with the change with Eirgar, yeah, it's great that he gets an extra turn, and I'm sure that that's extremely helpful in other content like Rift Beasts. But in Steel Fortress, it doesn't do anything because I watch my Eirgar use skill 1 4 times in a row every single time and never use skill 2. And it's just like, my mind is blown. My mind is blown because they come out with this content where they talk about, hey, we're going to make adjustments to the dungeons so that they're fair and they're understandable, right? We hear you guys are complaining about it. We hear and we validate your complaints, right? They're fair and they're valid. But then they completely miss the mark on what they actually need to do. We need units that either have passives that apply block beneficial effects or skill 1s that block beneficial effects. They were close with the theory behind Fei and Ling Ling with the skill 1 into skill 2, but the chance is so low that the consistency of it is non-existent, right? To my stance on this, after the testing that I've done, I've spent all morning testing Steel Fortress. I haven't looked at any of the Street Fighter units. I am extremely frustrated with the direction that they took the content. They made teams that already work based on multiple will sets not work as consistently because of the guaranteed 25% chance to stun. And then they tried to introduce new units or changes to units that could be used in Steel Fortress that are just really, really, really weak. First of all, people don't generally build defense-based comps, so Igmanodon and Gleanodon are fairly weak. And for Lingling and the Fei comps, they're just really inconsistent. So I'll show you some footage of all the different teams. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let me know what you think that they should change it to. What kind of changes should come to the dungeons.